The second theme that we were asked to address is recruiting and retention. In times that we have seen in the past, we have seen, how many of your organizations have seen tough economic times over the last 10 years? So two of you have experienced negative financial, you've experienced this little hiccup that's happened in our economy over these last 10 years or longer. And during this time, so many of our companies have been faced with cutting back, surviving, getting through this period with kind of this eye on hopefully things will get better, hopefully things will get better. We've been operating for so long now in that mode that now when things do eventually get better, are we ready to be better? Are we ready to grow? Are we ready to develop? And so our advisory board wanted us to address how we can recruit and retain good people, this war on talent moving forward as our economy starts to also move forward and start to improve. And our second session is going to be recruiting and retention. And we have a great panel lined up there with Julie Fletcher, with Rob Reindl, with Scott Sherman, and Laurie Jerome. And Laurie has more than 20 years experience in human resources, learning, organizational development, and talent management. She recently joined Experian as Vice President of Talent Management. Prior to joining Experian, Laurie held internal senior roles with AMN Healthcare, Open One Mortgage, the Coal Company, and this place with the ears down the road here, the Walt Disney Company. She owned a successful consulting practice for 8 years, providing strategic human resources services to a broad range of clients, including Allergan, or is it Allergan? It's Allergan.
It better be Allergan.
You can tell I'm new to Orange County. Angels Baseball, Disneyland, DreamWorks, Jenny Craig, Nestle USA, OCTA, and Semper Utilities. Laurie received a master's degree in human resources from Chapman University and a bachelor's degree in organizational behavior from the University of San Francisco, and I'm proud to say she is a member of our advisory board. So I will turn things over to Laurie. We'll give her a round of applause, and I will step out of the way and not be heard from for a long time.
Thank you. Thanks, Jay. I don't know if everyone, can you hear me okay? I've got the mic on. I want to make sure you're hearing me okay, or I'll start shouting out. Interesting, I was mingling and connecting with a lot of you here, and there is always that 6 degrees of separation. So I have to see if there are more. How many of you in the audience have either worked at or are working at Disney right now, huh? I mean, it was amazing how I went, oh my goodness, a blast from the past. There are quite a bit. Of course, we're in Orange County, and that makes sense, but it is fun, has been fun. The panel discussion today, I am actually looking forward to it because I want to hear what some of these great leaders in HR are doing to attract and retain and engage their workforce, because that is where we're all headed. When you think about it, attracting is extremely important. We talk about the millennials. I love to hear what really Ian had to say about some of the workforce, and I could see my team going, that's exactly what we might be dealing with now and in the future. So we'll hear some of the best practices, the latest thinking from the panel, and really the way we're going to go ahead and do that is cover attracting and recruiting practices, but also they'll give you the lay of the land of their organization so you can kind of get the context around what's their company like, so you can start to figure out, what are the practices that they're actually working on. And I think the other thing, I had a conversation one-on-one with each of them last week or actually early this week before today, and best practice isn't always the right thing to do in your organization, because one of the things that you start to understand, companies that we read about who are really out there as best practice, you know how long it took them to get there and what they're doing in their organization? So it's an evolution, and you can always think and evolve to something that's right for you, but a best practice is looking at that, getting some ideas, but not trying to really make it a plug and play for you and your organization, which I know all of these individuals realize that. And in some cases, they said, Laurie, we're aspiring to get there, we're not quite there yet. And I think all of us that are working within organizations today can say that. And you know what, I don't know that we'll ever get there with the changing environment that we're working in. And sometimes we don't know where we're headed 3 years out as fast as everything is shifting and changing. So with that, we're going to cover a range of these areas, engagement retention strategies, employment value proposition. That sounds interesting, but it's something that many organizations are really focusing on today. Succession practices, how do you build a pipeline? Because we also heard today that the millennials, very interested in career pathing. So what are these organizations doing today around that? Leadership development. It wouldn't be right for us to be sitting in this room here on this campus for this particular college without talking about some of the great leadership practices that they have in their organizations. And then the measures for success. And we'll also kind of upfront say measures for success are tough for anyone in any organization. I think that's something that many are struggling with. We'll go through the presentation. They gave me the license to say, okay guys, we got to move along on this particular question because we want to cover these topics, but also leave some time open, about 20 minutes at the end of the presentation for all of you to ask questions and hear more about the areas that you really have that interest in, really want to hear more about each of them. So before we really go into the actual questions that have been set up for them, I'd like to have each of them introduce themselves as well as provide a little landscape about the organization that they're with. So I'll turn it over to Rob.
I'm Rob Reindl. I'm the Corporate Vice President leading Human Resources at Edwards Lifesciences around the globe. Our company is the global leader in the science of heart valves and hemodynamic monitoring. So we partner with a lot of docs to develop innovative technologies to treat structural heart disease, as well as critical care monitoring devices. Got about 7,800 employees worldwide. Manufacturing plants are here in Irvine. That's where our headquarters is. As well, we have manufacturing plants in DR, PR, Singapore, Horb, Switzerland. And then regional offices in Brazil, in Tokyo, China, in Neon, Switzerland, and Singapore. So I think with that, I'll just pass it on to Julie. My background is started as an assistant dean of students in a private Catholic college in upstate New York. Worked for Planned Parenthood after that for 5 years, started the first men's program in the nation in the Planned Parenthood. And then went back for my PhD and taught at Ohio University for a while. And now I have my beard for 14 years, and I decided to go and interview at Arthur Andersen. Unbeknownst to me, they don't allow beards there, so I trimmed it up nice. And they told me I could have the job if I shaved my beard, and so I did that. And so I was at Arthur Andersen's Professional Education Division for 8 years, and my boss left and went to Baxter, and I followed her to Baxter, and headed up the Baxter Institute for Training and Development globally, and also an internal consulting practice, individual team and organizational consulting. And did a lot of consulting out here for a division of Baxter that was called the cardiovascular division here in Irvine. So the president of that division thought I'd make a good HR leader. I didn't think that I didn't know anything about comp or benefits or HR systems, recruiting. But he said he wanted someone that was into culture and into development as head of his HR. And so I came out here in '97. We spun off from Baxter in 2000. And today have a very, very successful company on the New York Stock Exchange, #1 player in heart valves, and recently got approval in the United States to treat heart valves without having to have your chest cracked open anymore. So it's crimped into a catheter into the femoral artery, and so a lot more patients now, life's tend to save. So,
wow. Hard act to follow. My name is Julie Fletcher. I am the Senior Vice President of HR at AMN Healthcare. Interesting that we'll have a healthcare tie. We are the largest healthcare staffing firm in the U.S. So we place any type of clinician into any type of an acute care or skilled healthcare facility, a little bit into private practice as well. Organizations at a little under 2,000 people, headquartered in San Diego, have a large presence in Dallas, as well as about 50 other offices around the US. A little under $1 billion as an organization. We are a very unique culture. CEO is a female, which is only 9% of all CEOs, and 60% of our C-suite is female. Very, very, very unique, special culture. My background is I grew up in Orange County. I was at Disney for 18 years, 11 of that in HR. Left and followed a dear friend and mentor up to the Tribune company that had recently acquired Times Mirror up in LA, and I did Los Angeles Times with my friend Jay for about 4 years. Great organization, amazing, trying to bring the Tribune culture together with Times Mirror, just unbelievably different companies and trying to bring them together, all the cultural challenges that go along with that. Left that organization after about 4 or 5 years, came back to Orange County, worked for the mortgage division of H&R Block, which is an organization called Option One. Had a chance to work with Laurie again, because Laurie and I also worked together at Disney. Have my master's degree in organizational development from Chapman University as well. Turn it over to Scott.
Thanks. I'm Scott Sherman. I'm the 25-year-old emotively satisfied, media intelligent leader of human resources at Allergan. I've been there about 20 months. I joined Allergan from Medtronic, which is the world's largest medical device company. And we're friends.
That's why Julie's between you.
That's right. Actually, that's exactly
We were
why.
so happy. We were so happy he took his job at Allergan.
That's right. And spent 15 or 16 years there in a series of human resources assignments around the world. Before that, I was with Exxon, where I had both human resources and sales assignments. Allergan is a specialty pharmaceutical company. Our best known product is probably Botox. Although probably not widely known that half of Botox is actually sold for therapeutic indications. Rob himself uses the other half for cosmetic indications.
And I heard there's an uptick in male purchasing through,
Right.
Yes.
No, so we actually focus in six different therapeutic areas, and we're very specialized. We actually have about 24 products. We've got between 10 and 11,000 employees around the world. We'll push, we won't reach, but we'll push $6 billion this year. You know, our attempt is to be an abundantly successful specialty pharmaceutical company, and not become Pfizer or Merck or J&J.
Pfizer doesn't want to be Pfizer.
I think they just want to be a better Pfizer.
Yeah.
No, that's great. So that gives you a little context about them, about their organizations. And then I am going to have them give us more context around kind of their targeted population, the general profile of individuals that they're looking at and trying to attract. And so before we go into even answering some of the questions here around attracting and recruiting the talent that you need to fit your organization, give us a little bit about your kind of profiled targeted population at your organization. Kind of what is the average age of your organization, the age of your population? What does it look like? I know my team would want to know, what's the typical day? How many open recs might you have at requisitions for positions at any point in time? Perhaps maybe in North America. Types of positions, and really what's your model for you know, sourcing, and you know, is it you know, using agencies, contingency? So again, let's go through that, and then we'll answer some of the questions that we have up here on the slide. Who wants to start with that?
All right, I'll go. We are.
Yeah,
microphone.
We got,
I don't use
well, does it help with the microphone a bit?
Absolutely.
From the back, yeah.
Okay. So we have a typical 100 openings at any one time. We use a model of some full-time in-house corporate recruiters. We use agency spend little when we have to, but try to avoid it. Typically hard to fill executive type of search roles, even though sometimes we do that in-house. We have a small kind of contract recruiting staff that kind of comes and goes on as needed. Most of our jobs are sales, which is unique because we have a pretty young population. So for the most part, we have a lot of recruiters that are recruiting healthcare professionals. There's different types, everything from mostly female-based that are going after our nurse population, all the way up to mostly male-based that are going after our physicians. We're the #1 physician retained search model. That type of a client is a CEO in a hospital, all the way down to potentially a purchasing buyer or a chief nursing officer in a hospital. Average age of our organization was early 30s until we did an acquisition toward the end of 2010, acquired an organization with more of a national footprint. Their average age was 45. So our dynamics on a lot of cultural issues really changed when we went through that dynamic.
When I first took this job back in '97, I remember looking at all the open recs that we had, and everyone was like 3 to 5 years experience, and I always wondered how we would ever get that younger thought into our organization. One of the things that we started in the late '90s and early 2000 was a program called the Technical Development Program, and so it's where we go out to the top engineering programs in the nation and ask 30 or 40 students to come to our campus, and then we pick about 10 of those folks every year, and they go on a rotation program. So one of the things we really do is like to bring in this younger generation, and we bring in about, in addition to those 10, what we call Technical Development Program, or TDPs, we also bring in a fair amount of interns. And so about, 20 or so right out of university people joining our organization every year. In addition to that, we have insourced all of recruiting for the most part. When I came into this job too, I would get really frustrated meeting with the search firms, and they would tell me, come in and meet with me, and then they take 30 days to go and research it, another 30 days to go and find the people, and then come back. And I said, well, you got a database, just give me the names. Let's get into your database right now. Let's look at people. Let's talk about it today. So we decided to create our own database. I think our database of engineers right now is 40,000 people or so.
Great.
And then the sourcing people. So we have about I want to say about 14 recruiters in our organization, and 50% of them are contract people, and 50% of them are full-time employees. So we can manage the the demand. If demand goes low or high, we can manage that appropriately with the contract staff. Let's see, average age in our organization around 45 globally, and around, if you just look at the US, it's a little bit less than that, maybe 43, 44. Let's see, what else did I ask for you? I think that's, we really do source a lot direct. The medical device industry is really, really small, right? And so we really depend on our people to refer people that they know. It's a small set of people, and it's also you got the Orange County factor, which sometimes it's tough to get people from Minnesota and Medtronic folks to come and move here, because moving from Minnesota to Southern California, I don't get that, but it is what it is. I moved from Wisconsin, so we reward $1,000 a pop when someone refers someone internally to our organization, and they successfully join.
I was gonna say, what's your percentage of referral rate right now?
Percentage of referrals, I don't know the exact, but internal referrals, it's fairly high for our organization.
I'm gonna stop on the way to Scott, sorry. Ours is 35% internal referrals. We do $1,000 for our, as well. Same thing, we have people trying to come to San Diego, but it's expensive to move there, so there's challenges with that.
And one other thing I forgot to mention, 140 open recs. So if you're an engineer or into quality or into regulatory or a clinical type person, we need people. Our revenue growth is 20% this year.
And
so
Robert, most of those out here, are they across?
That's 140 in the U.S.
Yeah.
So we've got, on any given day around the world, about 500 openings. There are about half of them in the United States, and we really don't have peaks during the course of the year. The entire year would be a peak for us. The average age in the United States is about 42. And interesting is if you want to reflect back to Ian's chat early on today, only about 6% of them are 28 years old or younger. So we are not generally a place that hires folks out of school. We generally hire mature, experienced folks in the organization. Not good, bad, just statement of fact. We are not. It's hard to come into Allergan with your training wheels on. It's just not the environment we have. Our focus is very clearly on execution, very clearly on accountability, and we're not always fabulously tolerant of the time it takes for folks to develop those skill sets. Again, not good, bad, or just statement of fact. Our primary interest from a talent acquisition standpoint would be almost exclusively on the near impossible to fill jobs, right? And so while you're visiting with Tori and Rob over at Edwards, you can stop by at Allergan and interview for roles in quality, regulatory, clinical.
This is really called the war for talent.
Actually, we should just buy one plane ticket and have them stop at both.
Two first.
Save some bucks.
Right.
More profitability.
Rob and Edwards would generally hire engineers. We would more likely hire, in most of our business, certainly in the pharmaceutical side, PhD researchers and scientists. Right. So there would be some difference there. And then we really look for exceptional salespeople and likely very similar to Edwards. You know, it's a relationship selling process because these are specialty products. So it's not traditional drive-by detailing that you may find in a more general pharmaceutical environment. We've got a model that blends full-time direct recruiters with contract resources, with generalists that support the function. We have traditionally used an overwhelmingly large number of third-party recruiters. We are trying to rein that in. We believe we need to own more of that, and not the HR function, but the managers and leaders in the organization need to be responsible and accountable for their talent and their talent development. If you look at our field sales organization, which has the biggest hiring needs, and Becky's here, we've recast that process over the last year to say all recruiting does not in fact come through Irvine. All sales leaders worth their weight in salt and gold need to know where the next 3 hires come from. Right? And that's also about serving the customers, because vacant territories actually sell less and service fewer customers. And so it's a blend. It's a blend for us.
I know I was going to say, oh, I'll hold questions till the end, but it's so topical, and I know I'm going to give it to him. Someone on my team has a question around it.
Well, I don't need
Go for it, David.
I don't need a mic.
Yeah, you do.
In a sense, you've all acknowledged that you're competitors with each other. So you've acknowledged that you're competitors with each other and you're very competitive. What are your separate sell messages to get people to come to your individual firms, since it is such a small community?
You know, we're going to get into the branding part. One of the topics that we're going to talk about is the EVP, and so maybe it would be
that will
okay with
be
we got a
into
whole
it.
thing on EVPs.
So actually it is one of those things, and that is one of the questions, is what strategies do you have to find, attract the right fit for your culture, for the roles, and so forth.
Yeah, you know, Laurie, before we go there, one thing, we actually use social media, especially LinkedIn, a great deal. Upwards of 40% of our hires will at some point come through LinkedIn. And for those of us that aren't in the recruiting end of the business every day, what we see when we get an invitation to connect in LinkedIn is not what LinkedIn has the capacity to do. So we use other things like Indeed to ensure that our postings get to the right place, and we push things out to LinkedIn actually to also encourage our own employees to then refer folks they know. And so we use that. We use that instead of Facebook and Twitter. Maybe because we need more than 140 characters.
I have to say, Denise Malone in the audience, I always get those LinkedIn. Hey, I've got an opening right now, so I always kudos to her. She's out there making sure she's using LinkedIn, not just for herself, but for her organization.
That would be Denise Malone, formerly of Disney, currently with Allergan.
Yeah, there's that connection.
Oh, boy.
Anyone else, as far as strategies, what are you using to just draw that right? Any type of strategy? Referrals are great, but you can't always get those for those, we call them the purple squirrels. What do you do? Tough to find.
Yeah, I mean, finding some of this technical talent is getting more and more difficult. I mean, it is getting very challenging. It's in the medical device area,
the FDA has gotten a lot tougher with approvals, and so it's just a lot more challenging just to get a product onto the market than it was a few years ago. And so, you know, that's why this need for more regulatory, more clinical. They're forcing a lot more trials, and so there's, you know, these trials are very, very expensive, and on the P&L that goes into R&D, and so when you all of a sudden you got to pay for these very expensive trials to get a product approved, you know, you're putting that on your P&L in the R&D, and so all of a sudden R&D is looking inflated, but even some R&D dollars comes away because you got to spend, you know, some of your R&D budget, or a lot of your R&D budget on these clinical trials. So this need for technical talent is becoming very challenging. In fact, you know, at the next, we have an infrastructure in our company. The ELT meets, our executive team, group of officers, 14, meets once a month, all day. And so that's a rather large amount of time to meet for officers around the globe to come face to face once a month. And then before that, we have a subset of them that's part of a finance committee, and a subset of them are part of a talent committee. So these folks spend, you know, 2 hours of that day before we even start meeting to talk through some of the talent challenges. At our next one, we're actually looking at regulatory and clinical talent. What can we do? You know, first of all, what's the issue globally, and what can we do differently to go after it? And brainstorming things like, we have this engineering rotation program, maybe we should have a regulatory, you know, rotational program, something like that.
Actually, I was going to say, let's move into, which kind of, for those of you on the panel, I switched the slide because I think about when you're really trying to, we're on the employment value proposition, which is really, what is that differentiator for you as an organization? We're saying, you know, there's, why should I come to work for you? What do you have? What's different? And when you think about that, what do the individuals that you're trying to recruit really look for? And one of the things that we have been talking about, even at Experian, is our career site really says a lot about who we are, what we have, what do we have that's the price of admission. Really, everybody has it, so you better have it. But what are the things that you can say, this is what makes it different to work for our organization, which is now what we're calling out there the employment value proposition.
I'll take that first, Laurie, too. And coming in from the last questions, I think we're a little different from Rob and Scott. We don't hire a ton of technical people. We're mostly ops and sales at the bottom. But if you think about it, we are in the healthcare staffing business, and the top 4 job shortages in the world are all 4 in healthcare. So for us to find doctors and nurses and all types of clinicians that want to come and work in our business, which is to place them, it's a wonderful thing because the hospitals can't find them themselves, so they have to come to us, but we still have to attract them. So I was laughing that I do have a Twitter account, and I was tweeting about coming to this event today, and I was looking at whether or not my peers here are part of that world of Twitter. And I normally was not until recently, but all of our C-suite, it just shows you a little bit, again, about your audience and your company. My CEO is on Twitter regularly, and that's just, it's different, and it's an evolution. So we do use a lot of social media in our organization. But I want to talk just a minute about employment value proposition and really give kudos to Laurie, who was in an LNTD, our top LNTD role at AMN when we built ours. And it's a, somebody asked earlier about how many of you have been involved in a downturn, and our organization was absolutely bashed in 2009. From a staffing perspective, the challenge of that is people in clinical jobs just hunkered down. They wanted to stay in their job. Their significant others oftentimes lost their job, so they didn't want anymore to do anything unique except just sit in their full-time job and hope that they got to keep it. So huge downturn for our business. So we have a phenomenal culture, values-driven, phenomenal place to work. It's all great. But when you lay off 750 people in 9 months, I view it that you took an axe to that great culture. So our responsibility was really to kind of close that little crack in the foundation very quickly. So we built an employment value proposition. It is a legal things that you all read about, happened very aggressively in our organization. But we stopped long enough to say, but who are we in good times and bad? What is our story that we will continue to invest in over time so we could sell it as we began to rehire, and we committed to it within our current population. And we came down to 4 attributes for our organization. The first is being values driven. So our values are not words on the wall. We talk about them all the time. And for all the years I've worked at Disney, we have friends here from Disney. At this mid-sized organization that I work at today, someone talks about the values every day. Passion, respect, trust, customer service. continuous improvement. Not a day goes by where someone isn't talking about the values. So that's very important. I watch my new hires at hire 60 days, 120, and say, are the values live every day? And they say yes, because we train our leaders to demonstrate the values. So it's a differentiator for us. We also are committed to quality. We hire to quality. We train to quality. If you can imagine, have to put a nurse to work. Does that nurse have to be high quality? Yes. We put a nurse to work and a patient dies, we're out of business. That's on the front page of the paper, by the way. We could lose our complete business. Collegial work environment. We tell people, if you're a Lone Ranger, don't come work at AMN. We break down the silos between our businesses and work together. Collegial is very, very important. And lastly, career development. So we want you to build a career, so it's great to hear Ian's presentation. We want people to stay with us for a lifetime. Our purpose of our organization is professional and personal development. That's for a nurse or a doctor, that's for a corporate employee. So that's a differentiator for us. If you want to be with us, we will build a career, we will give you a mentor, we will do things like that. We want you to stay. And those 4 things are talked about collectively as our EVP. And we sell it hardcore in the marketplace. So in San Diego, we are the employer, I believe, from a differentiator perspective on our EVP. It's a little bit about our history. Sorry, that was a long answer.
A little bit on our EVP. So we hired a woman by the name of Janet, I think her last name was Morrison, from the J. Morrison Group, and she was the one that helped us put together ours. And it's innovation and humanity are the 2 words. So our company is all about creating innovative technologies, right? And so if you want to come someplace where you get to work on some really cool stuff, this is a cool place to be. And there's some brilliant engineers that I just can't believe what they've developed. I mean, no longer to have your chest cut open and be able to get a heart valve replaced through a catheter. Unbelievable, right? And so there's also, we take it beyond R&D, right? To say that we want to, everything that we do should be innovative is really important to us, right? So just to have a culture that's innovative. It's the one thing that I worry about the most as we get bigger. So we're going from a $1 billion company to probably a $3 billion company here in the next 3 or 4 years. And I worry that we're going to become one of those big companies like Medtronic or Boston Scientific or St. Jude or all these competitors that we deal with every day. We're small and we're nimble and we're flexible, we're agile, and I worry about that. I worry about hierarchy, more rules, more policies. I mean, a team of my folks just recently came back and said, we should make everybody in the company have a PMO on development. And I said, wow, so you want to have a rule. It's just, everybody slips into this. As you get bigger, it's easier to influence through rules, through policies, and I'm trying to get people to not do that. So that's one thing. This humanity piece is big for us, right? I mean, so you come to Edwards because you care. We care, right? We care about how we can provide clinicians with the right technology so that they can influence the saving of someone's life, right? And we care about that, right? If you don't, like, I didn't realize that until I got here. When I used to work at Arthur Andersen, I go, wow, I work for the #1 accounting firm. It doesn't exist anymore. But that when you say that to a neighbor, it was like, wow, you work at Arthur Andersen, right? But at the end of the day, we had an audit, a tax, or some kind of system, right? At Edwards, at the end of the day, you have a life saving, and it's different. And so you drink that Kool-Aid, and you come in, and you do feel like, the credo, helping patients is our life's work, and life is now. You feel a sense of urgency. We got to get this going. We got to get this technology out in a quality way to save these people's life because they're dying every day. People 80 plus couldn't have their chest cut open lots of times, right? So within 2 years of being diagnosed with cardiovascular disease, they die. Well, we're making a difference on that, right? That's what's cool. So if you don't feel like you get to go to work and you feel like you got to go to work, I tell people, go work someplace else because that's not allowed at Edwards.
Definitely, that truly is from the heart. You can hear the passion in what he's sharing about the culture and the product and what you do. What's that?
You've been there.
I've been there. I've seen it. Excellent.
Yeah, and I want to be. I think it was David. You asked. It was
Yes.
David, right? You asked a question. So, very much like Edwards, we have a culture that is very entrepreneurial. It's very customer focused. It's very execution oriented. We really do focus on the impact that we can have on our customers and their patients' lives with a great deal of passion. And for us, it's around being nimble. It's around being execution oriented. I don't think that Edwards and Allergan actually compete against each other. We do compete for some of the same talent, right?
Their CEO's on our board, so we got to kind of watch that.
We meet every Thursday. We go to therapy together. It's all good. So we compete for the same talent. Now the interesting thing is, right? Anybody know the unemployment rate of college graduates in the United States? It's under 4%, right? Under 4%. For the folks that we're generally looking for, the unemployment rate is actually below the natural rate of unemployment, right? So what we have to do actually is find some way to create greater supply because we know we're creating greater demand, right? So that is a different challenge that we face, and because the Orange County community is as small as it is, it would be detrimental to the business community in Orange County if we actually competed against each other as opposed to try to create a bigger market, right? Allergan and an EVP, we've done all those things that I mentioned. Our focus is that way. We want to be the anti-big pharma company in many ways, and so we attract folks who want to be in an organization that is not bureaucratic, that is agile, that is execution oriented, where you roll up your sleeves and engage in the work of the day. You will not be successful with us if you don't do that. That's a challenge because a lot of the big pharma companies, you do get to sit in your office and give instruction all day. And if you do that at Allergan and I would say at Edwards, that's probably approaching your last day of work. And so we have to work that through. Where we need to improve on is that next step, which is turning work into career, right? And that is our, in fact, big effort now, bless you. And for us, creating that value proposition is going from job to career. So we grow about 10% a year, our employee population by about 10% a year, but unfortunately our turnover is about the same number, okay? And a lot of that is because we're not offering career. And so the focus for us now is on offering career. We've used as a tagline for the business for some time, our pursuit, life's potential. So for our employee base, it's our pursuit, your potential. And so we're developing those frameworks now to turn it into a value proposition. We, in fact, had not even articulated a global set of values until the last few months. 100 Allergan employees surveyed, and they all came up with the same 7 things. If you asked them for 6 things that described Allergan, you heard the same 7 things all the time, but in different languages or in different nuance. And so we've recently articulated what those are so that we can be consistent. That moves us more towards the value proposition, but also towards a clear set of values that then we can use in the organization.
Great. Thanks for sharing that. I think linked to what you're sharing.
Question?
Yes, thank you.
And we have to, by the way, we have to continue for all of us to stay nimble and not bureaucratic and right-size the organization. You know, it's about what's the span of control. As you want to develop people, there's this tendency, oh, well, I'll let you lead. Great, what are you going to lead? One person. That's not called leading, it's called managing, right? It's called bureaucracy. It's called narrow spans of control and layers. So it's all staying on top of that as well.
There's a company called Octane too. I don't know if people have heard of that, but it's a company that's trying to attract new businesses, entrepreneurial type businesses to Orange County, and then also all kinds of talent. So they're trying to get us all to work together on this whole talent thing as well.
It's actually good to hear them talking about limiting or being cautious around getting so big that bureaucracy sets in, because at Experian we did get so big that the bureaucracy it's settled in, and now we are on a big effort called bureaucracy busting, and it's global, and it's amazing what we have to redo now as a result of what we became. So moving along, though, into engagement and retention. So when you think about, you've got the right people, you drew the right people in, obviously you want to manage those who are in and you want them to stay, but engagement, now are they here? Have they quit and stayed? Or are they really performing and producing and doing what you want them to do? How do you measure engagement? What actions are taken to drive that engagement? And how do you hold leaders accountable? Are the actions, are they put into play? What's going on around engagement today in your companies?
So why don't I jump off? So 40% of our turnover are people with us 2 years or less. Okay, so I'm really passionate around you need to use data, but you need to use data not to report, but to inform decisions, okay? And so what does that mean for us? That means our recruiting process is not likely what we need it to be. So really working around that over the last year and a half or so as an effort not just within HR, but within the business organization, right? Because it's not the HR team's job to hire folks, and I think we have been that way. Our job is to facilitate a thoughtful process where leaders get the folks they need for today and the future. So that's a piece of it. And another piece of it is folks tell us on their exit interviews why they're leaving. So how does that inform decision making? They're leaving primarily for career development, right? So you know what to do. You need to establish career development frameworks. So the answer can't be, oh, if you want to get promoted, just wait, it'll be your turn, right? It worked for me, but it doesn't generally work today. So that's work that we have to do. We have recently started looking at engagement in the organization, and engagement is more than, and I think Ian articulated a lot of those reasons this morning, it's more than just an increasing share price, right? It's more than just a bonus payment. So it is about being involved and having, being a good corporate citizen. So yesterday, for folks that participate in our United Way campaign, which has been successful, for the first time, we're also saying, and you get 6 hours worth of paid volunteer time over the next year. And the emails I got yesterday were, I'm sorry, was I really there this morning, where we're actually saying, in this very execution-oriented culture, we're encouraging you to spend 6 hours of time in the community. Okay, great engagement factor. We just started a wellness program in the last 6 or 7 months. We had over 50% of our US-based population participate in biometric screenings and online risk assessments. Okay? That's over 50% in the first, in the first occasion. And the $100 incentive isn't what did it, right? That was just gravy, right? So we're working on a series of engagement factors. But engagement is something where, we've been using the information that we have to inform decisions, but we don't have enough information. And so we also announced yesterday, and this may surprise some of you, that on May 14th, we will conduct the first global engagement survey we have actually ever conducted. We conducted a satisfaction survey. The last time we did it was about 15 years ago. So when you think of Allergan and all of the great things that Allergan is and does and its brand, we're also recognizing we have to do things to understand what happens in the organization better. I think really passionately, the thing about engagement is not to define it for your organization, but let your organization define what it in fact values, and assuming those values are aligned with the organization's overall values, you've got a winning formula, and then you follow, and you just don't do it from the C-suite.
Great, Scott, I'm surprised at the
engagement
survey, yeah.
Edit that piece.
Yeah. A couple things, definitely huge engagement for us is around touching the community. We are heavily involved in San Diego in lots of philanthropic. I mean, we had a MS Walk, like some crazy number, like 400 people showed up. I mean, families, it's very much part of the culture and who we are. We have been doing engagement surveys for 8 years, used CLC for our benchmark partner for years. They did a phenomenal job. What I'm probably the most proud of is that we never stopped, even in the middle of our downturn. So from an engagement standpoint, I think the two best things we did in 2009 is we did the survey just like we said we were going to do year over year. We knew the results were going to be horrific. It didn't matter. So my CEO and I had a really chance to say, but amidst all the trauma, we want to know what's top of mind for them that we can actually do something about. If they say we want raises, okay, great. We just laid off 750 people. That's not going to happen. But we never stopped watching, and we get about 80% participation. Switched recently to a great new company, if anyone's looking, called Perceptics. Much better on the technology side. This past year, we got 5,000 qualitative comments, and our CEO read every one. She is passionate about knowing what's going on in the organization. We create action plans. at the highest global level, as well as each leader is responsible for creating an action plan, and they turn them into her. So if you don't think that holds people accountable, that down to the manager level, as long as you have a cut, which would be statistically valid, blah, 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 you have to do an action plan, and it goes all the way to the top. And those action plans then don't get put in the drawer. We are looking for those to be pulled out quarterly, back to the staff meetings. People are talking about what's on the engagement survey, because otherwise, whoop, a whole year is going to go by. If you haven't done anything about engagement, your scores are going to go down. Great news is we beat the benchmark year over year, and for years, even back when I was at Disney and we did satisfaction way back, there was a nice little bell curve of like 70, 15, 15, and those numbers have been way skewed for the past 3 to 5 years. But it's nice that they kind of range in the kind of 9% highly engaged, and we beat that. We're at about 11-ish%, which I'm super proud of. Because for those, Laurie, to your point about disengaged in place, that's hugely problematic.
We use a company called Connexa to evaluate our employee engagement. I think they're the best ones out there. I've tried all different kinds over the years, and these folks are able to identify what are the drivers for engagement for any manager who has 5 or more people. And so the drivers for the engagement on my team might be different than what's on Julie's team and what's different on Scott's team, and they acknowledge that. We don't have the same drivers across the organization for engagement, but through their statistical analysis, they can tell every manager what is it that drives engagement on your team. And so that's what I like about them. Scott mentioned something about using data to inform, and I'd like to comment on that too. We all know why people leave organizations. That hasn't changed over the years, right? It's the boss, it's the pay, it's the career development, it's the promotion that they didn't get. That hasn't changed all that much, right? HR departments have data on all of that. So what we did is when about 10% of our professional population is high potential, and about 10%, maybe more than that, 15% of our employee professional part of our organization are key talent. These are technical people that you probably don't want to have managing a bunch of people, but they're brilliant, and we don't want to lose them, right? So about 15% of our population is that. So every officer in the company gets what's called the top talent risk assessment that tells them whether or not any of their top talent are at risk of leaving the organization. We in HR have that information. Why not give it to them, right? So for example, we know every top talent's boss's employee engagement score, so that's on there. We know whether or not they got promoted in the last 2 or 3 years. They didn't, that can be a concern. We know what their bonus payout was last year, right? And if it wasn't over 100%, that could be an issue for a top talent person, right? In fact, I asked stupid questions about stuff, and one of the questions I asked our comp team was, what was the average bonus payout for the top talent, and what was the average bonus payout for people who are not top talent? Who was higher than not top talent? We give them harder stuff. We give them, we were harder graders on them, right? So now what we do is every manager who has top talent underneath them, they get the average out at 115% for their bonus for those people, versus all the other people, they average out at 100%. So to try to push that number up to retain our top talent. We know that people leave organizations because of the number of bosses they've had in the last few years, right? If you get another boss and another, you get tired of that, I'm out of here, right? We have that data. So we put check marks on these things, for every one that, doesn't meet a threshold that we think is important, and we give that top talent risk assessment to every officer in the company. They sit down with their business partner or generalist and have a conversation. Should we do anything about the risk that we're seeing? And the answer may be no, we're not going to do anything about that, but at least it forces the conversation. It's an example of taking the data that we have in HR organizations, turning it into information so that people can make better informed decisions.
No, that's really good information, because I think one of the things I was talking about earlier is that measurement, you got to have data in order to be able to measure, but you also have to think about how do you take that and now do some workforce planning in advance of the year or 3-year plan. And I think I was telling Julie in a conversation that we have a tendency to take a look at and do everything in between, but the planning, the workforce planning and analytics and the measurement always seems to be the things that we hesitate to put a lot of rigor around. So that's good to hear that you're really doing a lot of work around that. Succession practices. So a lot of what Rob was saying made me want to now kind of piggyback on what you were sharing about what do you do with that critical talent pipeline, and how do you ensure that that pipeline in that bench strength is ready? Have you assessed them? Have you identified them properly? And then how do you prepare them for those future roles? And is it across the globe? How are you doing that?
I'll go ahead and start, Laurie. Succession planning we take very, very seriously at our organization. It's a formal annual process, and I started saying before that the two most important things in our worst year that I'm the proudest of is doing our engagement survey, and also literally the first year we rolled out succession planning was right in the middle of that downturn. So we had executives that in the morning were laying off some of their people, which stinks, but what is that? That's a short-term thing you have to do. And then 3 hours later, my staff has them in the room saying, where do you want to be 3 to 5 years from now? People's heads were spinning. Like, what are you doing? I just had to let 3 people go. Sorry, we want to know if you want to be here. Should we continue to invest in you? Because we know we're going to come back. It's whether or not you want to be here with us, and do we want to continue to go down that path. So process for us launched about 3 years ago, shortly after I arrived. We use a top-down, bottom-up approach that, thanks to Laurie, we were written up in Harvard Business Review for best practice. And it was really all about the fact that it's not just what the leader thinks of the talent and what their capabilities are, but then you have to actually talk to the person and find out what they really want, and are they willing to do things like sacrifice on behalf of moving their career up? Like, what is important to them? How aspirational are they? Do they want their boss's job and all the trauma that comes along with that? So do a top-down, bottoms-up approach, check in. It's an annual formal process, but check in quarterly. What's unique about our organization is that we don't have a product. We're a staffing agency, so all we have is our people. So we have to continue to invest on an ongoing nature in our people, and we are trying and getting better, I think, kind of year over year at truly building a culture that embraces development. So the challenges are we're quarterly, right? So we have to report out to the street. So when there are revenue profitability targets hanging over every executive's head, and that you say, well, for the better of the company, you need to move Susie from organization A to B. You're like, okay, but I don't have a backfill for Susie yet, and that could be literally a tank on our revenue and profitability. So we're not huge. Unfortunately, both of these gentlemen have much larger companies, so we have to be really careful for building bench strength for the future, because again, if you move and you have a hole, that's a problem, and then literally that person's personal compensation is affected. So one of the things, we literally just had a meeting on this week with the CEO, is she's so passionate about getting our talent and succession numbers to a better place, and they're good, better than they were certainly 2 years ago, but our like ready now candidates, if you think about succession, there's not as many numbers in those boxes as we want them to be. We have great 1 to 2 year out, 3 to 4 year out, but at the end of the day, what she is now asking, because we have all the development, bells and whistles in place, she actually wants the executive committee to come to her quarterly, bring in the development plans for their people, and say, what have you done this quarter for these people? So direct accountability to the CEO around development, so you can't just say, well, I'm kind of working on it. I mean, my goal is my C-suite to wake up every day and not just think about driving profitability, et cetera, but also thinking, what am I doing for my people today? Because if we lose our talent, again, we as an organization go downhill pretty quickly. So huge focus in our company.
Yeah, let me acknowledge that this is a key working. Let me again acknowledge, this is an area of work in progress for us. This is not something where we excel yet. And so we've been working pretty diligently on this, the whole succession identification and planning process. And it's hard for us. Last year, as part of our process, we asked leaders to say, what will your organization look like in 2 or 3 years? And just the looks that you got back were just panic. I don't know. Right? And so part of it was we probably asked that a little too deeply in the organization than we should have. But it goes to indicate that we've generally had this nearer term focus in most of the organization. So right now, big area of focus is succession planning. I think the biggest issue for us is that the bench we need the most of are credible leaders, right? Great people want to work for great leaders. And so the most critical bench for us is around developing those great leaders, be they in the technical community or the non-technical community, be they informal leaders and mentors, or be they formal leaders as supervisors. So that's been a key focus for us. That said, we've put in a talent review process. It used to be a bit of once a year, limited folks, goes to the board. Now we actually do those as, for the most part, as communities. We had over 100 talent reviews that happened throughout the organization all over the world last year. My preference is that folks do them in groups, because you engage in a level of discourse around the talent needs of folks, but also around the talent assessment of those folks. And so, really? Yeah, not so much, right? And we're trying to get folks, and I think Lominger does this particularly well, to differentiate between those folks that demonstrate excellence in performance with those folks that demonstrate they've got high potential, right? So, not that I don't want you to give Lominger Korn Ferry a whole lot of money, but that concept in and of itself just bears consistent thought regardless of the tools you use to assess it, right? And so there's a lot of work we're doing there. We also just don't create successors for positions. We look to create succession pools, right? Our sales organization. Having a series of successors for the sales manager in one business in Richmond, Virginia is far less important than do we have 40 succession candidates that can be deployed throughout a series of those jobs. And now we're starting to have those talent review meetings multiple times a year. One of the things we did is we said to the board, we think we should be talking about this more than once a year. So they of course always would say, yes, we think that's a good idea. So then it makes us accountable for having those conversations more often.
This is when Laurie cut me off if I go on too long, because I love this topic. So late 90s, we're still a division of Baxter, and Vern Laux announces as the CEO of Baxter, I'm stepping out. Harry Kramer is my successor. And between the time he announced it and the time that he actually left the CEO office, he said, I'm going to have McKinsey come to every region and every business unit and do this diagnostic to say what should be the strategy for that part of the organization and what should be the strategic imperatives. So we all went, oh no. And so, when they got done at the cardiovascular division, they pulled me aside and they said, Rob, have you seen the stuff on the war for talent? It just came out. So they just published this body of work on the war for talent, late 90s. And they, based on the strategic imperatives, we start talking about, well, what might be the strategic talent imperatives that are related to that, right? So that's been a process now that's been going on since 1998. In addition to that, we then started what's called, in our organization, talent development reviews. These are bottoms up by region, function, and business unit. They end up at some point in time in the CEO's office with myself, with the officer in charge of that part of the organization and their HR business partner. And we do 15 of these. There's 15 total in terms of region, functions, and business units. And it's about a 3 or 4 hour discussion for each one. So you can imagine a CEO spending, 15 3 or 4 hour meetings a year on this. And what happens in those meetings is the person comes in and says, okay, here's the strategic imperatives for that part of Edwards. How are we organized to get after that, and how might we organize differently? And if we are going to organize differently, what's the migration strategy? What are the critical jobs, right? And so that is a very lively discussion. Everybody wants to have their direct reports be their critical jobs, and we just don't allow it to happen. It just won't happen, right? Once a critical job, not always a critical job. There's different things that are going on in the environment, right? Then we get into the performance of the person in the critical job. Once the job is a critical job, then the CEO and I own that job. If it's not performing, we're all over it. If it becomes open, the head of that unit can't just put someone in place that comes to us, because we may know of someplace in the organization that would be best to do that. In addition, we identify high potentials in there, and we also identify the key talent. Coming out of that, there's all kinds of differentiation around top talent. I don't know if that's going to fly with the millennials, I don't know, but we definitely differentiate, right? So they get higher, if they're top talent, higher bonus targets. They might get a higher equity grant. They get more opportunities for training and development. So as a result of been doing that now this is our 14th year doing it, we definitely have grown and evolved this process. It was in Training and Development magazine, highlighted a few years back. But you go, well, what is the real measurement? Rob, are we being successful by doing this, right? And so you look at things like, when we spun in 2000, our margins were 45%. Today, 71, right? You don't think this had something to do with it? Come on, right? Today, or when we spun off, our market cap was $750 million. Today, $10 billion. Right? You don't think this had something to do with it, right? Back then, when we spun, we were spending 3 to 4% on R&D. Today, 14% of revenue on R&D, right? You don't think this had something to do with it, right? And so I think what the reason why I conclude with that is I think you got to look to these kind of hard number figures that really measure an organization to some extent, because if those are going up, more than likely you're doing something right with the talent to feed that. Those successful numbers.
And Rob just really helped me segue into our next and actually final section before we move into the Q&A, which is the leadership development element. So you've identified these individuals. They are your top talent, but they can't remain top if you aren't doing something to continue to develop them. And I love the fact that it says the best leaders are 50% more likely to outperform revenue targets than those with poor leadership skills. We know that has a lot to do with our retention of that workforce, definitely. So with that, what does your organization do to develop, formally develop leaders, but also we know that formally, I don't know if all of you have that 70-20-10, 70% of learning really takes place on the job, stretch assignments, what you're doing day in and day out. 20% might be through coaching, mentoring, as well as observing the great, I really should say the good, the bad, and the ugly of others. When you start to observe and somebody points that out, oh, that's great, this is how it works, you learn from that. You learn from kind of others' mistakes. And then the 10% is really that formal, classroom training. But oftentimes, it's always, oh, Laurie, can you put a training program together for that? And to me, development is so much more. So I'd love to hear what you all are doing around your leadership development.
So around this, so certainly this gets talked about in that talent development review process. If the person is identified as a high potential, then the natural next discussion is, well, what are their next 2 jobs, right, in the organization? So that this whole idea about jobs make a big difference, couldn't believe in that more. It is all about the different jobs that you change around, right? So then you supplement that with, we put together what's called an Aspire curriculum. We're an organization that's led by aspirations. And so the way we came up with our Aspire curriculum was we said, okay, we're going to do focus groups with the 25 managers that got the highest employee engagement scores. And we're going to ask them, what is it that they do to be such great managers, right? And that's how we formed our Aspire curriculum, right? So I mean, you can go and ask all these people, what should you have in your leadership curriculum, or what does Rob Reindl think as the former head of training and development globally for Baxter, is what we should do. The people, go ask the people that are really performing out, in outstanding ways, high engagement scores. And what are you doing? And we picked up some really cool stuff from them, and so that's what formed our Aspire curriculum. The other thing that I'll say is, I mean, we get into a little bit of definitions, right, around high potential and key talent. I mean, this whole idea of what is a high potential, and we're actually zooming in on this right now, right? That we had the traditional definition, can move up 2 levels, and all of a sudden people could get up to like a VP level reporting to a business unit head, and they go, wow, that person's not a high potential anymore because they can't go 2 levels. They're not going to be a CEO. And go, wow, something's wrong with our definition, right? So we're really looking in on that right now and saying maybe it's something that's not so black and white, something so hard and fast, but maybe it's something like the potential to be in a business unit head or functional head or regional head, jobs head, right? And kind of maybe leaving it at that, right? And some people are going to say to me, well, but what, how are we going to define that? And I go, really? I just don't go there with that, so I'm going to leave it at that.
This is the one you're going to have to cut me off on, Laurie, too. Leadership development, huge passion again in our organization, remembering that all we have is our people, right? So we look at leadership development, I think, in a unique way, that we are going through a cultural transformation on moving, and I know these gentlemen have the same challenge, moving from a technical leadership base to an inspirational leadership goal. A challenge in all of your organizations is typically the best technician then gets promoted to the best leader. That's a problem. Person may not be able to lead their way out of a paper bag. So lots of work to be done. We're a lot of passion around leadership development at the top, but my narrow focus right now is at the bottom, because the challenge is people go into leadership roles for all the wrong reasons. So we have a couple things going on. So we are literally asking any of our individual contributors to go through a series of preparing to lead before you even raise your hand and say, I think I want to be a leader. And we ask some questions when you actually then apply to be a leader and say, why do you want to lead? Because there's a whole big people, soft, squishy aspect to lead. You might never want to lead. Really? Because at AMN, leadership is up here, and the minute you get into a leadership role, we're going to hold you accountable. So you better really want to lead. Not just because that's where the next money is. So then that gets into the whole career development, that you better have a career path that is non-leadership. Because not everybody's supposed to be there, and they can leave a wake of dead bodies if you got bad leaders in your organization. So a lot of work there at the entry level, because otherwise they just keep going up and up in those bad leadership behaviors. So you got to hit it at the bottom. And then at the top, because leadership development is relatively new at AMN, we literally went to we've done Momager and have great executive and leadership conferences we love. But we literally now are going executive by executive. They look at their leaders and say, which competencies are they the lightest in? And how do we go laser surgical into that particular competency and work on that, versus I'm going to teach you everything you need to know about leadership, because some might be better at some things, not as great as others. And then we've just launched, literally in the past couple of weeks, what we're calling a competency-based mentorship program. So Ian talked about mentorship earlier. So if it's a Julie, and what she needs to learn better is to get better at developing direct reports and others as a competency, let's hook her up with the person who does that best. So if you think about that, that's laser mentoring. Not I'm going to mentor you on everything, but we think these 2 or 3 competencies will make you go from good to great. And then we want to measure that, see how that's working, and then we want to push that out over the organization. Right now that's pilot, but I like that we're lasering at the top and we're trying to really set the stage. And I'm staring people at the face and asking them questions. Who's the best leader you've ever worked for? We put that stuff up on the wall. Why was that the best person you ever worked for? Now, is that you? Are you a great leader? If you're not, let's talk about how to get you there, because that's our expectation. We want someone to walk in this classroom a year from now and say, oh, I work for Rob. Rob's one of the best leaders I've ever worked for. But that's a huge cultural transformation, especially in technical aspects of companies, because you never ask potentially a technical leader ever to be an inspirational leader. So it's big cultural for us.
Great. Thanks, Julie.
And let me do this quickly so we can go to questions. Sure. We actually started the leadership development process, or the framework, by actually going to employee development first. And so the thinking behind that was, if we're going to capture the hearts and minds of the organization, to have confidence and faith that we're developing development programs that enable them to grow their career and spend more of their work lives with Allergan. So average tenure at Allergan about 7 years, but the average really masks some of the bifurcation that exists. So we started with an employee development framework, and we refer to it as learn, do, master, and teach, the 4 stages of careers. But we gave that a number of months where we rolled out employee development programs, and then we started working on the leadership development programs. The other thing that does is we're trying to create demand amongst the broader employee population for better leadership of the people to whom they report. Right? So we're trying to build, really we're trying to encircle it. And it's, as I said earlier, a work in progress, but it's something that we're actually enjoying now, and we've now said that, you know, around the world we use the same curriculum. We'll do some social nuancing in different markets, but it's the same curriculum. So pretty excited about it. But create the demand, create the desire, and be pretty transparent about it.
You know, one thing I'd like to say is that air a little bit of dirty laundry here. It's really sexy to get into the leadership development stuff and the leadership curriculum, right? And so I mentioned before what our Aspire curriculum is, all this cool leadership development stuff. And all of a sudden we woke up one day and we have a middle management gap. because we all of a sudden put aside all the management development that a lot of you maybe in this room got, you know, that delegation skills, the performance management skills, the time management skills. And don't forget about those things along a person's development pathway.
It's so true, because I heard Julie saying that now they're talking about the leadership fundamentals, what do individuals need. Same thing it's Experian right now. We spent so much time on our high potentials and more senior leadership. Got a lot of great programs built. However, this year globally, same thing. One of our key strategic initiatives is to just build the fundamentals for leaders. So it can shift easily, and you have to keep your eye on all of it. So let's go into, we've got, I think Jay said we could go until 12:15 with a Q&A, so that gives us a good 15 minutes to open it up to the audience with questions that, you know, these experts can share their answers with you.
First of all, incredible presentations. All of you are so passionate about your jobs. I think maybe Rob had a little bit of pharmaceutical grade amphetamine in his drink. But yeah, that's good. This isn't my question, but branding-wise, how do you compete with the happiest place on earth? All of you have a global footprint, and this is a struggle that UPS had is you know, the diminishing amount of technical people coming out of the U.S. and having to get foreign people in, and we exhaust all of the visas and things like that. I mean, we produced 70,000 engineers last year in the U.S. China produced 700,000. So matching that up against your societal things, when you bring this foreign talent on board and you begin to integrate them into your cultural things, and what kind of a challenge is that in terms of the mix of culture and talent search?
Challenge, right? So I'll give you one specifically that Edwards is working on right now. Growing in China at 70%. Growing in China at 70%.
Exactly.
That's revenue. And so people-wise, I want to say we placed 120 over the last 18 months, right? And so the pace of which we can not only attract them to our company, and by the way, in the Chinese region, more and more, because of all the layoffs going on in the United States, they're getting more skeptical about U.S. parent organizations, and so we're having a more difficult time.
Right.
But also the pace at which we're able to train them and get them up to speed is, it's just growing so fast. How do you do that, right? I think that one of the things that helps culturally with us is that our officers are all incented the same, right? They don't get incented by their own regional or functional or business unit. We're on the whole company, right? And so when you all of a sudden align the incentives the same, you start to say, you know, your part of this is important to me, because if you don't make this, I'm going to get hurt, and likewise the same back at you. So. One of the things is incentive does help with cultural diversities and helping people, you know, support that part of the world that's growing as fast, and you know, so that's part of it. We do have a whole diversity initiative right now going on at the company, and so just helping people understand that differences can be a real advantage. We're pushing hard at that because of all the growth internationally.
Joe, is your question about how do folks of different backgrounds work effectively here?
Well, I mean, the dynamic is, what I'm describing is we got as much talent as we could here, so then you have a difficult choice of, do you try to get as many people from foreign countries to do it, or do you actually ship the work out there and have it done there? But then how do you maintain the continuity, the culture, the fidelity to mission?
Yeah, I don't actually think that question is limited to the United States or China or the United States and some other country. I actually think there are very different talent supply markets within the United States. So we have, as an example, been relocating dozens of people a year from Pharmaceutical Alley, generally New Jersey, to California each year. What's happened over the last 5 years? My house is worth a lot less. It's dropped more than the house I will buy in California has dropped. My spouse works. You know, I can't get a mortgage. I can't do this, whatever it is. And so we've been actively moving folks from the East Coast to fill jobs in California. Oh, by the way, we're out of space, and space in California costs money, and there's not a lot of it available where we are. So we actually decided this year to move the jobs. Now these are growth jobs, non-existing positions. We're moving the work to the talent supply. Instead of trying to move the supply that doesn't want to move to California. And so we announced that we're opening a facility in New Jersey that Stephanie's working on, amongst others, that will have 400 science jobs in New Jersey. So I think you have to take advantage of where supply exists in an increasingly difficult age of mobility or immobility. Yeah. And I think we have the same challenge of how do we ensure that the culture there is what we want it to be. Now, that doesn't mean it should be the same as the culture in Irvine, right? And I think we have to be really careful about always saying the culture has to be the same. It has to have the same basic values, and it should have the same aspirations, but it doesn't mean it needs to be identical. And so I think whether or not it's here or China or Japan, all places that we are establishing commercial and R&D footprints in, it's the same thing. We deploy folks from Allergan in Irvine or Santa Barbara, where we base these businesses, or in Waco or in Ireland, wherever the core business exists today. We will try to deploy folks from those businesses to these new entities for a period of time. But we also don't want to make it like we're sending the Americans everywhere. Yeah. Right? Because that's not effective cultural sensitivity.
A very good point, because when we moved the headquarters of UPS down to Atlanta from the Northeast, the experts told us you can't move your IT operations because the mother lode of IT talent is still going to be in the Northeast. So I see what you're saying.
Look, and if you're looking at R&D, it is a 24-hour-a-day world. So can you actually shorten, and it's not just R&D, in any product development life cycle, can you shorten the duration of that product development process by actually working at 24 hours a day? Right? So it may not be 3 times as fast as if you worked at 8 hours a day, but will it be twice as fast? And does that then serve your customers better? And does that increase the pace of innovation? I hope the answer is yes.
Yeah. Thank you.
Good, thank you. Question over here.
Question. With all the talk about talent management and high potentials, I'm curious from the panel, how transparent is your organization with identifying and telling those people they're top talent so that they don't leave and so that they know there's a plan for them?
So real quick, I'm going to repeat the question for anybody who didn't hear it on this side. It was, with all the talk about high potentials and going through the succession process, how transparent are they with the individuals who've been identified as the high potentials in having those conversations? Because there's a controversy around that, I'm sure.
We're moving more toward transparency at a greater degree. We identify high potentials when they are identified in multiple successor pools, which we talked about. So the person who was the top successor knows that she was the top successor. I wouldn't say that 90% of the organization knows who those people are, because that could be challenging as well, to Laurie's point. But the top people know who they are. They don't say for that job, but we say you're a hypo, you're a top successor. Guess what? More visibility to the CEO. Guess what? Maybe a special mentor, maybe special compensation, things like that. So we're relatively transparent on that I think to the degree that is helpful for us. And we like to publicly acknowledge when our top successor, we say, hey, we promoted Bonnie, she was on 5 succession pools. So try to make that as transparent as we can.
And even with, I remember in AMN, with one of the individuals was a high potential, the following year the performance went down. And so even when you're sharing that initially, the conversation needs to be, you've been identified because of these reasons. So it's really a very strong, robust conversation, so that you're not guaranteeing this, you've got a spot now, versus you've got to maintain that and continue to drive performance.
So how many have been involved in a situation where somebody was leaving the organization and the leader says, oh, but do you know what you could have been here? Right? Okay, not the data share. And it should happen earlier in the cycle. And so I believe in transparency, but transparency has to follow an effective assessment process. Okay? And so I think at Allergan, we will get to the point where we tell people pretty transparently generally what we expect they can become if they continue to develop at roughly the same pace. but only after we're comfortable we're making those assessments properly. Otherwise, we create this set of irrational or inappropriate or unrealistic or just plain wrong expectations, which then really results in significant business and engagement challenges for our organization. I think it's fair to folks. I think that's what they're investing in. They're investing in career. More important in some Asian markets than it is in the United States. So when we lose people, I'm guessing, in Asia, right, it's rarely about money. It's more about career, which is status and is money, right? And it's the housing allowance in China, because if a gentleman in China has a bigger housing allowance that goes with his bigger job, he is more likely, sadly, to attract, maybe sadly, to attract a spouse, right? And it's career, it's not money. It's all the other things that go with it, or India. So I think we have to be really smart about it, and if we get good at assessing potential and developing careers, then we can be comfortable in being ethically transparent.
No, we tell people, they get a letter, it tells them that they've been identified as top talent. A conversation pursues with them that says, when's top talent, not always top talent. So every year it's evaluated, and it is what it is, right? Because you have to have that conversation up front, like Laurie said, because there might come a time when they're not performing at the standard that we would want for top talent. We do differentiate, I mentioned that earlier. The challenge now becomes, if we're trying to hold the high potentials to 10% and the key talent to 15%, and you start to throw things at them, higher bonus, shares and everything, does that influence managers inflating the number of high potentials and key talent? The answer to that is yes, right? That's the God's truth, right? I mean, it is what it is. So how do you manage that? That's a challenge, right?
And then how do you have the candid conversation with the folks that are not on that list about why?
That's
so
a transparency problem.
Once you tell 10%, it's not the 10% you're communicating with. It's still the 100%.
Right.
Right. And so therein lies the challenge. Yeah. So nobody complains about being on the top talent list.
I think that's great.
Right? No one ever walks into your office and says, "Oh, I'm really upset. I make too much money." Right? So it's those folks that feel that they're on the have-nots list that you have to be candid about, transparent with, and equip your leaders who have to have those conversations, right? Because you'll have 10 times or 20 times the number of leaders that need to have those conversations than are having the you're on the list conversations.
My final comment on this too is all the way down to your entry level leaders. What's important, and I challenge leaders with this all the time, is even if you're entry level and you got 5 non-exams below you, does your top 10% know that they're your top 10%? Right. Not successors, not talent, not any of that stuff that happens at the top third, but heaven forbid that person should not walk, and you should measure your turnover by are your highest performers leaving, even if they're an entry-level team member. So challenge leaders, if you can't identify your top percent and they don't know it, then you're not doing your job.
Do we have time for one more question, or is it time to wrap up here?
I think we have time for one question. I think there's a question over there.
Where was I know Julie had a question. Yeah?
What's a purple squirrel?
It's exactly that.
Yeah, exactly that. They are so difficult to find.
It's the same as a blind squirrel. Even a blind squirrel finds a nut every now and then.
Sometimes, yeah. So, it's so hard. What do we do? But you'll have a chance to talk over lunch as well, correct?
Going once,
how do I
going
decide?
twice.
Well, let this gentleman, I'm going to give up my team and have this gentleman ask a question.
Julie, you mentioned that if you want to keep high performers engaged in addition to the high potential, then it's very important to have a career path that they can get excited about too. So can you talk just a little bit about it, because I know that can be difficult. So how do you start to think about creating that career path for if leadership isn't necessarily one of the goals?
We're still working on it. In some areas it's more clear than others. So for sales, we kind of have a sales path that you can go so high, and then we think of it as kind of like a super sales path. So because again, leadership is not for everybody, but you really have to continue to invest in that person and make sure that their incentives and their upside are all tied to their performance. Because we like to have realistic conversations with people, because if they're going to lead and then they're going to, heaven forbid, fail, right? Because now they're a leader of salespeople, for example, and they probably, you know, and oftentimes they never should have gone into that direction. And you have to be, again, crystal clear about what are your leadership expectations. Or people can see, but if I become a leader, then I can become a manager and all those kinds of things. And so you have to find jobs that they can continue to evolve to that are kind of higher level individual contributor jobs. But you got to continually work on that. We do a whole bunch of work on anywhere in our company. You can click. This again was some of Laurie's team's work. You can click in any organization and learn more about the jobs themselves. So it's kind of we call it career connection. So if you, like to say you're in sales and you think maybe it would be interesting to go into operations someday, even if I don't want to be a leader, you can see the individual contributor jobs. You can click on them. You can find the competencies that would make you successful. You can find the key performance indicators, how you're going to be measured, et cetera. So I think you just have to pay attention to those high performers who maybe don't want to be leaders. And you kind of have to hold their hand a little bit. That's a great question.
Yeah. When I was assigned internationally with Medtronic, and we were having this, this quandary around we can't find leadership jobs for all of our great reps, primarily a distribution organization, commercial organization outside the U.S. We actually did something smart, because our employees encouraged us to do this. We actually asked sales folks, what is it that you actually want to be? And so one of the things you have to be careful to do is, or not to do, is make assumptions around how people want to develop their careers. And we found in that organization that the vast majority of our sales organization wanted to remain great sales reps.
That's right.
They did not, in fact, want to be sales leaders. And many of our great technical talent want to be fabulous technical talent. So it's also around listening to what folks want to do so that they stay engaged and satisfied. It's rare that you'll have a individual contributor make as much as somebody on the C-suite, but you might, right? And you have to set up those ladders, those individual contributor ladders get taller than they used to get.
That's right.
Right? And you have to be comfortable with that. You need your technical fellows. You need your great sales mentors. And you have to be comfortable to keep that talent that you will pay them at 120% of your market value. And by the way, if you're doing that for 10% of your folks and you're keeping them and they're inspiring others, that's great work. It's just different from the traditional thinking.
Excellent. Well, we're going to close the panel discussion.
Really special thanks to Laurie for being our moderator and organizer of this panel. A special thanks to Rob for helping to recruit in this panel as well, and for Julie for coming all the way from San Diego to join the panel. We appreciate that. And Scott, thank you for being a part of this group, and for all of you for supporting the center. We really do appreciate this great dialogue. I mean, we could probably go on a long time. This is a great job. Let's give them another.